So again, I'm David Irvine, and I don't have Kristen with us today. She's off restoring her wholeness on the ski hill, enjoying herself well. So we always miss Kristen, the spark plug in our organization. So greatly appreciate her, but we'll miss her today. But I'm on my own introducing myself. So thank you very much for joining us. Whether this is your first time, please introduce yourself in the chat room. Feel free to let us know where you're calling in from. And whether this is your first time here or if you've been here before, because I know we just have a wonderful group of people in our community that keep coming back. Folks, I've been struggling a little bit. This deal of offering a webinar every month is actually growing a little weary because I keep thinking, how can I come up with something new that people haven't had? And I know our numbers are a little low this month. And I look at this title and I'm thinking, if you come in here as a CEO or an executive in an organization, what on earth is restoring wholeness? First of all, what does it mean? And what does it have to do with building a better company? And so my whole premise here, hopefully you'll be able to answer that by the time we're finished. But I'm going to speak from where the bulk of where my heart is right now, and let you know just where I'm coming from. And this is really the foundation of my work. And hopefully I'll say it in some new ways. But this is a message that I repeat often. So I appreciate you being here. And the whole premise is how this relates to building a better organization is, folks, when it comes to, if you want to be a good leader, just be a good human being. And I think that's a strong value that you're going to get from my perspective as I go along here. I just want to make sure, Marg, is my sound coming through okay? Can you hear me okay? Yeah, good.
Yep, sounds good.
Okay, great. Well, the other thing I want to say is I get very personal. And I just want to do a little trigger warning. I will get personal if anything gets activated for you today. It is not my intention to do that. But if anything, for any reason, activates you, feel free to look after yourself, step away from the call, and feel free to reach out to me if I can give you any support during the week, if anything gets stirred for you. All right. So you'll often hear me say this: if you change the way you look at things, the things that you look at will change. So basically what I can mostly do in the next hour is, and how it works here is I'll talk for probably 50 to 60 minutes. And if you're able to stay on the call, I know many of you have to get off after an hour, no problem. But I'll be stepping away from the call after. I'll be on the call, and if you want to stay on the line and have some conversations afterwards, I'm more than happy. And I think what we find is that last half an hour, if you can stick around, of questions and answers and sharing with each other, I think people will often tell me that that's sometimes the best part of the webinar. So having said that, I'm in the middle of a transition in my own life. Many of you know this. And I'm going to try to describe what that transition is to what I'm going to call the evening of my life. And it's a little bit, I'm going to say flustered. I'm a little bit uncertain. I'm going through my own disruption in my own life. So I'm in the middle of that, and it's a very creative time, but it's not necessarily a time where I can really articulate myself well. One cannot live, I'll start with a quote here by Carl Jung, one cannot live in the afternoon of life according to the program of life's morning. For what was great in the morning will be of little importance in the evening, and what in the morning was true will at evening have become a lie. So I'm going to actually try to articulate that statement and see if I can operationalize that statement. So the morning and the evening. Now, I'm going to use words. Don't get too hung up on the words. I want you to get a feel. We can all argue the fact that there's a little bit of morning in the evening and a little bit of evening in the morning, and they kind of come together. And if we talk about wholeness, we want to really integrate these two energies together. But the morning for me is about external success, position, popularity, prosperity, prestige. It's making your mark in the world. It's planting your flag. It's about ambition. It's about growing up. It's about achievement. It's about accumulation. It's about comparison, knowledge, and self-gratification. The evening is about an internal success. You emerge to a place where you have internal success, where it becomes about character, contribution, and compassion. Very interesting. It's the difference between resume virtues and eulogy virtues that begin to emerge the importance of. Now, for those of you who are very aware, you'll begin to integrate some of these evening values into your morning work. But for some of us, this is the authentic journey to go from the morning to the evening. And it isn't an event. It's not like, okay, where do you begin the evening and where do you lose the morning? It's not like 2 o'clock in the afternoon and now you're in the evening. It's an emergence to this evening. And, it's very interesting. We have a men's group, and very many of our men are in this evening place in their life. It's also a time that suicide is very high, particularly among men in our society who have defined themselves in a certain way. And then they get to the evening of their life and they wonder, who am I without all that external success? The evening is about fulfillment. It's about what I call growing down. It's facing some darker aspects of our life. It's facing some grief in our life. Maybe it's happened through a diagnosis. Maybe it's happened through some hardships, some adversity, some loss, where we begin to really recognize, you know what, this runway I'm on is not going to go on forever. And what does life really mean? And what is my contribution now in the world? Many people, we call this time a retirement in our life. I don't want to retire from life, but we certainly are defining our life in a different way. I am retiring from being driven by the morning. The paradox for me is I've spent a good part of my life, and this is a bit of the irony of it is that I've spent a good part of my life growing my business, being ambitious, creating achievements, creating external goals, and teaching people how to be more in the evening of their life. But now I'm actually integrating this and really experiencing it beyond what my mind says. It's about connection. It's about letting go. I mean, I think we spend the first half of our life accumulating stuff, and then the next half of our life letting it go and getting rid of it. Most of you know my own story about downsizing last year and the freedom that comes when you just let go of stuff and realize the stuff really, nothing really matters in life. And you begin to get a whole different perspective. It's about, instead of comparison, it's about contentment. It's about wisdom, not knowledge. I mean, we can gather knowledge, but wisdom is something very different. And it's about self-awareness rather than self-gratification. Now, I know it's not perfect. It's not a perfect delineated chart. I would love your take on what the morning and the evening feel like in your own life. What experiences do you have in the morning? What experiences do you have in the evening? Now, I want to make it really clear. The morning isn't bad. It's a natural step in our growth in the world. Some people haven't even gotten out of bed yet. I got to tell you, I'm counseling a couple right now who came to me to get some advice and some perspective and support with how to motivate their 25-year-old. And I says, well, what's the story? And they said, well, he sleeps all day and he plays his video games all night long. And I said, well, what does he do and he lives in their basement. I said, what does he do for a living? And he said, nothing. And I says, well, who's paying the bills? And well, of course, the parents are paying the bills. And I said, this might be a time to get him up in the morning. This might be a time to have a little wake-up call where life doesn't happen by taking care of people. Life happens when you pay the bills. And so that's a morning task. And the guy hasn't even gotten to the morning yet. I like to use this, my story. Many of you have heard my story about my neighbor who's a 22-year-old who wants to be the best. I said, what's your goal in life? And he wants to be the best realtor in the province. And he says, I'm going to buy me a Jaguar and be this outstanding realtor. And I put my arm around him and I said, good on you. This is what's going to catapult you into adulthood. It's good to have some ambition and some focus and some goals. But if I talk to him 20 years from now and I said, now what's your goal? And if he says, oh, I'm going to I want to buy a bigger Jaguar, well, then I'll know something, that he has not taken the authentic journey. He's not integrating it into the evening yet in his life. He's not growing down. He's still growing up. And many people live their whole life in this morning phase, and they don't honor the evening of their life. If you carefully consider what you want to be said at your funeral, you will find your own definition of success. And this is what happens as you get closer to this age, as you get closer to the end of the road. Who knows when it is, but when you get closer, it awakens you to really what matters in life. So what I'm going to offer to you is 3 messages today that I've discovered that I'm going to try to attempt to articulate in my own journey toward, and I believe that the whole purpose of life is to reach this state called wholeness. And it's really not a destination. It's a method of how we get through life. And I'm going to equate wholeness with authenticity. And I'm just going to share with you 3 messages today that I've learned on my own journey. Now, you may have some different messages on your journey, on your shift between this morning and the evening of your life, no matter where you are on that journey. And there may be some of you that just aren't ready to hear this message. If you're strictly in that morning, if you're driven and ambitious and focused on making your mark in the world, this message may not have a lot of value for you. And I'm less attached to making that happen. I just plant some seeds today, and if it fits for you, let them grow inside of you. And it may not fit for you for another 5 years, 10 years, or maybe 2 weeks that you begin to, there's nothing like facing some adversity in your life to wake us up to what the importance is of this message. But again, these are my 3 messages. Discover your true nature. Know what truly matters to you. And I'm going to talk a great deal here about the difference between a quality of life and a standard of living. We have a culture that is greatly focused on a standard of living. And I hope to challenge that notion and really help us leave here with an idea of what a quality of life really means, and lean into the hard stuff. So let's go through this one at a time. First of all, you'll hear me say this a lot. You don't need to change yourself. You need to come home to yourself. And this changes everything. Now, what does that actually mean? It's so easy to, is that an esoteric platitude, coming home to yourself? So I'm going to try as best I can today. I'm going to make every effort I can to see if I can operationalize this. And what does it really feel like to come home to yourself? And you can begin, by the way, I ask this often, but please feel free in the chat room to talk about, how do you know when you're at home with yourself? It may be a question that you've never asked yourself. What are you actually talking about, being at home with myself? It means coming in to your true nature. Now, my premise is that we are all born in our true nature. If you look at into a baby's eyes, you will feel the essence of their spirit, because they're so close to our origin, and we were all there. If any of you who are parents of more than one child, or an aunt or an uncle of more than one child, you understand that right from the get-go, we have a different essence. We have a different character, a different person that we bring. We have a destiny to fulfill in this lifetime. But what happens is we grow up in this world that tells us how we should be. Let's face it, it's a whole lot easier to raise an obedient child than it is to raise an authentic child. And so we grow up in this world protecting ourselves, trying to survive, constructing a self in order to survive in this world that tells us how we should be. And we lose touch with what I call our true nature. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of examples of this. First of all, some of the most rewarding work that I'm doing these days is I spend about 20 hours of my week working with recovering addicts. And I'm going to tell you a story of a recovering addict. I'm going to use a different name to protect his anonymity, and I'm going to call him Dylan. Now, Dylan is a person who he's 35 years old. He spent probably the last 15 years of his life in jail, up until about 5 years ago. He spent the first, from the time he was a teenager until he was 30, he spent it incarcerated. Now, if you go back to his life, he was born just like all babies, whole and born authentic. But when he was 8 years old, he watched his father get shot by a gang member. And the only male role model he had in his life was his brother. And they got into crime. They had no sense of any stability at all. They got into crime. They got into stealing cars. They got into drugs. He became a crystal meth addict. And we got it when he got out of jail the last time. He said, I'm going to get clean, and I'm going to take care of my recovery, and I'm going to get into recovery. And what happened was that he gained 500 pounds. And I'm working with him now every day to help him get healthy. And he calls me for 15 minutes every day, and I'm working at getting his health. Well, here's what's happened. His brother just got out of jail. Now, he's been clean, and Dylan's been clean and sober for 5 years, and his brother just got out of jail. And this is the guy who he has leaned on his entire life. And I'm pretty emotional about this because I just had this conversation this week. And his brother wants to see him. His brother wants to connect with him. And he knows that his brother will take him back into drugs and crime. But his true nature is not crime, and it's not drugs, just like his brother's true nature is that, but he has not discovered that. He's not discovered his true essence. And he had to, for the first time in his life, said no to his brother. And he walked away from that relationship because he had to count his own well-being, his own recovery as more important than trying to please his brother. And it's a big step forward in his recovery. And so I'm supporting him through that journey. And it's a journey to his wholeness. And it's a journey to him integrating into his life. Now, what does wholeness mean to you? I've got a good friend whose daughter, she was a physician and wanted to go back to school and become a specialist. And she was living with a guy who all he wanted to do was watch reruns of The Office. And that in itself was just one symptom of a much bigger issue in their relationship. But the relationship was just too small for her. And she had to move on. Now, I'm not suggesting that that's a strategy that we all use, but she could not compromise herself. I got to tell you, in my 20s, I walked away from a religion, and I walked away from my community and my identity and my family because the religion was too small for where my heart was. And I could not find a place for me in that organization. And I had to walk away from it. And that was probably my first step in my 20s moving toward living an authentic whole life. Maybe you're in a career that's too small for you. And maybe there's decisions that have to be made to say, how can I bring a bigger self to this, or how can I move on? And there's no formula here, but the first step is to connect with your true nature. Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive, because what the world needs is for you to come alive. A poet must write poetry. A painter must paint. A musician must play. And I have a good friend who's a welder, and he said, I found my nature when he was in one of my presentations. He says, I found my nature when I found a spark when I was 10 years old, and I have to weld in order to be at peace with myself. What is it that you have to do to be at peace with yourself, to come at home with yourself? What does it feel like when you know you're at home with yourself? What does it feel like when you're not at home with yourself? And to begin to even ask the question. And it's okay not to have an answer. But what question is there? And I'm going to give you an example with our dog. This is Enzo, and my kids will say he looks perpetually embarrassed. We got him from the Humane Society about it would be almost 10 years ago now. Now, Enzo, he was not abused to our knowledge, but he was in a kennel for 10 months, and he had very little human contact. and very good natured, but very shy and very as embarrassed. Now, to the best, you can see some border collie in him, but you also, the best of our guests, he's got some whippet in him. Whippets, for those of you who know that breed, they're fast and they're hunters. Now, a whippet will take a greyhound in 100 meters. They're fast. Now, he's not a purebred whippet, but he's got some whippet in him. But for 10 months, he had never been, to our knowledge, off of a leash. He did not know that he had legs. He did not know he could run. And when we brought him home, we were in an acreage where we had the edge of 200 acres of nature conservancy. And we just said, go at it, have some fun, go run. And he would walk for about 5 meters and then lie down. He did not know he had legs. And we kept encouraging him to run, but he didn't know he could run. He'd never been off a leash. And about 3 days after he was home, he found his legs and he ran in circles, and he ran and he ran and he ran for 3 solid hours. He never stopped. And you see him in the this is how he was in the kennel when we met him, and this is still how he is in the house. But I'll tell you, when he gets outside and finds his voice, that's what the Sufis would call connecting with your true nature. This is what he's born for. And when we don't get our legs, when we don't find our voice, what's the impact in our life? That's the question I'm asking you. Now, my daughter, and I'll do my little self-serving promotion here. Her and I do a podcast together. Her and I are mostly aligned. Of all my daughters, she's I won't say she's my favorite. I would never say that, but she's certainly one that I connect to the best. And I can tell you, when she's home when she's around her little one. When she's around kids, she is absolutely at home with herself. When she's teaching, she's a high school teacher. She teaches drama and English, and she will bring her little one. This is just an excuse to introduce you to Juno, but she will bring Juno to class. And then this is her and I are she's helping me write my memoir. And this is her editing my memoir, and her little Juno here helping her out. This is the writer in the budding writer. My oldest daughter is a potter. She has to get into the studio once a week. She has to get on the wheel. This is where her voice is. She also is a diver, and she's got to get down to Mexico at least 2 or 3 times a year and get diving. So this is where she feels alive. Now she's got a job where she sells real estate. She's a real estate developer, and she's a graphic designer. She has a variety of work that she does, but this is where she really comes home. We can't be at home all the time with ourselves, but the thing is to realize, when am I at home with myself? When am I relaxed? When am I at peace with myself and fulfilled? And when I talk about mapping your authentic journey, your authentic energy, we have short-term satisfaction on one side of that and long-term fulfillment on the other. And if you map that out in this quadrant, this is what's stimulating, what brings me real happiness right now, stimulating. If you're not satisfied, if you're not experiencing happiness, and you're not having long-term meaning, we call that slogging. When you're in the meaningful quadrant, but it's not necessarily happy, we call that sacrificing. And then when those two come together, we call that in your sweet spot. Now, I can tell you, my dad's generation, he would never have even thought about sweet spot. I remember asking my dad, did you like your job? And he would say, what does liking my job have to do with anything? He lived his life in the sacrifice. And he said, the only reason I go to work in the morning is that I can make enough money to one day pay for your education. That's why he went to work. He didn't have the luxury like we do, even having this conversation. It's a privileged conversation. And he spent his life sacrificing and paving the way for our generations. And I know we don't want to go back to sacrificing fully. But we also have to learn that it's not bad to sacrifice. And my premise is when we need, these are seasons of our life, and we need to spend time in all of those seasons. Yes, sometimes you just have to roll up your sleeves in your work and get the job done. And it's not particularly stimulating and it's not particularly meaningful, but you just do it because it has to be done and you're part of a community. And sometimes we can experience some stimulation and sometimes we can experience that sweet spot. And sometimes we just have to sacrifice for the greater good. But my premise is, what if we could be growing that sweet spot? What if you had a place where you worked, where people had conversation? I don't know when the last time you had a performance review when someone asked you, how's your sweet spot? How are we connecting with your true nature? Now, if you bring your true nature to work with you and you, like I do, this is my nature. I can't help but teach. This is who I am, and this is where I'm the most relaxed and most at home with myself when I'm working with a group or when I'm counseling and helping and coaching or when I'm writing. This is my sweet spot, but I also have to do some sacrificing, and I'm not always in that, but I'm growing that. What would happen if we could start to have conversations in our workplace where we could help people grow that sweet spot? Now, maybe you're in a job right now. Maybe you're in a place right now where your sweet spot is at it away from work. And this is a paid job for you where you get to live your sweet spot at home. We call that an avocation, where you live your sweet spot where you don't get paid. And I always suggest that the most fulfillment comes from from the work that you don't get paid for. If you happen to get paid to be in your sweet spot, we call that a vocation. But whether it's a vocation or an avocation, it's critical that you attend to this in terms of your own well-being. So that's some thoughts around discovering your true nature. Now let's talk about how knowing what truly matters in your life. Folks, everywhere I go, I see people like this stretched by so many demands in our life, this tyranny of these urgent demands pressing on us. And you know what? I'm even finding that in my own life right now as I move into an area where I don't have to work anymore. And I'm spending a lot of time volunteering my time and giving my time. And it's starting to get to the point where I need to practice what I'm preaching right now and stop, because I'm keeping myself so busy. I'm not allowing myself to actually slow down and connect with what truly matters. It's all fulfilling, but the level of demand, I understand what that's like when you get stretched in many different directions, right? And to thine own self be true. Well, this is a good statement, but what mask are we talking about? And what is self? What self are we talking about? Because we're so good at masking ourselves and giving the world what the world needs and conforming to the world and meeting the world's needs. I mean, I've spent growing my business here the last 45 years. And a good part of my business was all spent on when a client would call me and said, what do you offer? And my response is, what do you want? And I would give them what they wanted. And I'm probably, I can tell you humbly that I'm probably better than anybody in the world at creating an experience for a client and tailoring what they want in the whole human area. I can create that experience. But then I start to wake up in my life and I start to say, what do I want? What does my heart desire? And so the very thing that I'm teaching you, as I say, that which we're most capable of teaching is what we're most in need of development within ourselves. And to say, what does my heart really say? And this is one of the reasons why I'm doing these webinars, is because I don't have to meet anybody else's expectations. And I'm growing pretty not attached to how many people show up here. I just believe the right people are going to be here and the right people show up. And I'm not really as attached as I certainly used to be, because this is an avenue for me to share my voice. And I don't have to meet a client's needs. And I'm getting more courageous now, where I still get invited into organizations, but I'm really more conscious about bringing my voice and my where my heart is and bringing that to the world. Socrates said it this way: beware the barrenness of a busy life. Now, I don't know that a busy life is necessarily a postmodern challenge. Maybe it's a human challenge. Maybe we've all, this is thousands of years ago when Socrates came up with this statement. Maybe we've all, why would he call a busy life barrenness? That's a very interesting word that he used. When we stay so busy that we don't connect with ourselves. There are times in our lives when we are on narrow roads, and at those times we're fools if we try to maintain our usual speed. Folks, the one message that I have for us all today to remember is to slow down and really discover within ourselves what truly matters in our life. Stop and get your bearings. I've spent time in the wilderness and I have been lost. And what happens is it's an old and ironic human habit that we run faster when we've lost our way. The anxiety of being lost speeds us up. And what happens is we just get lost faster. And one of the messages that I'm conveying today is to slow down, get your bearings, find out what really matters in your life. Where am I today? Where am I in terms of living my life? Am I living my life whole and at home with myself? Or am I just dispersed, meeting the world's expectations? And this is I'm going to say it's the dark side of accountability. Some of you have been on my webinars on accountability. I'm big on accountability. I've written books on accountability. It's a big premise for me, but it's a strong value of mine. But here's what happens is that the accountable people in organizations take responsibility for everything. And it's the 2080 rule that 20% of the people in the organization are doing 80% of our work, and the accountable people just keep taking it on because they want to be accountable. And so this is an opportunity to be accountable to yourself and to really examine where your own life is. And are you living the world's expectations, or are you really listening to your own heart? What in your life is calling you when all the noise is silenced and the meeting's adjourned and the lists and the agendas laid aside? What still pulls on your soul? In the silence between your heartbeats, hides a summons. Do you hear it? Name it if you must, or leave it forever nameless. But why pretend that it's not there? And what you will find when you begin to settle in and quiet your mind and be still, what you begin to understand is this difference between a standard of living and a quality of life. What the world wants from us is to believe that we're better off by having a high standard of living. And this is back to my original comments, this is mourning mentality. It's what the world expects of us, to say, build a standard of living. Now, if you don't have any standard of living, it's hard to have a quality of life. But your standard of living, once it gets up to a certain level, it's not going to bring you any more peace in your life. And how would you personally define the difference between a standard of living and a quality of life? You can't really be authentic unless you really define for yourself what is a quality of life for you. And so I feel free, even in the chat room, to put regarding your comments about how would you distinguish between a standard of living and a quality of life. Yes, we need a particular level of standard of living, but I think my parents would say that we're a little spoiled. It's interesting. I just read an article last month in the Atlantic called "The Film Students Who Could No Longer Sit Through Films." It's a very interesting notion that these film students used to get assignments, watch a film this week. And what they would say, what we're learning now from this research in the Atlantic article is young people, we got a whole generation, people can't sit through films anymore because they're too distracted and they can't actually sit and concentrate. And in that article was a quote, a definition called a term called cognitive patience. I'd never heard this before. And the scholar Marianne Wolf mentioned it this way. It's the ability to maintain focused and sustain attention and delay gratification while refraining from multitasking. So I'm going to ask you a question. I mean, I've been through my own webinars, and I know the tendency to multitask while you listen. And we won't do a survey on this, but how easy is it? Let me get my emails done. How easy is it for you to sit for an hour and actually be present to an experience? Now, part of it might be, I may not be as engaging enough, but how many of us pull up our devices in the middle of a movie? How many of us can actually sit through a movie? I've had some discussions with my publisher who wants to get my books on Audible. And I will likely break down and get those and sit and record them for a week and just get them on Audible. But at this point, I like real books, and I want people to actually sit and make time to reflect and to be with themselves. How can we possibly know what's important in our lives if we don't slow down? If we're living that barrenness of a busy life? And our devices are not helping us, because our devices are telling us what the culture wants, what the culture expects, what the world wants. And so we spend our life comparing ourselves to what's on our devices and what we should have. And we rant on these and we're not connecting with our heart. They're not a device, a tool to help us connect with our own voice. Now, Howard Mitchell, I hope you're on the call. I want you to you're working on a great, this is a bit of a side story, but it actually connects very well to this whole thing called wholeness. You've got an initiative called, I'll let you define it in the chat room. And I hope, Howard, I didn't ask you this, but I hope if you're on that you can stay on afterwards and people can have some conversation about the initiative that you're doing to get us off social media. At least the experience of the difference between having a real day and having a day on social media, and introducing this notion not just to our young people, but to ourselves as adults. We are getting addicted to this thing. It's an addictive a device that's creating all kinds of dopamines in our brain, and it's not bringing us into wholeness. So I just want to offer to you, how would you define for yourself a quality of life? Now, the only way to know that is to get still and to sit with a pen and paper. And I always encourage my clients to take out a real pen and a real paper and actually write this. When you put your thoughts down on a journal, on paper, you go to a different side of your brain than you do when you're on a keyboard. But sit and reflect on what does a quality of life really mean. I'll tell you, when you're walking your brother through a cancer journey and you're taking him into the next, into dying, and you're dealing with an addiction and you're faced with depression the way I have in my life, it stops you and it forces you to slow down. And it makes you really examine what is a quality of life. Now, I'm going to tell you the 3 components of my quality of life. But again, I can't answer this for anybody else. We all have to come to terms with this. So these are the 3 words that I use as a guide to map out my own quality of life. Number 1, my level of contentment. That everything starts from that, to be at peace with myself. Everything flows from that, so that I'm not striving any longer, and recognizing that. And by the way, these values that I hold here are really aspirational. They're not necessarily descriptive, because I can get back into that morning of my life as well as quickly as anybody. And so then I just have to remind myself that contentment comes from inside. It comes from the world cannot fill a hole inside of me. It can't make me feel enough. I don't care how many people sign up for this webinar. The number of people signed up for this webinar, there's a time in my life where I would actually define my worth based on number of people that I got signed up. I'm really detaching from that and saying, you know what, if you want to drop off, no problem. But my contentment doesn't come in the approval of others. I'm just growing into that stage in my life. But that's something that I'm aspiring to. Number two is my connection, the quality of my presence with the people that I care about in my life. And then the third value is making a difference and continually volunteering my time, offering my perspective in the world so that I can make the world hopefully a little bit better off than when I got here. And I run my business, and I've really never been able to articulate this until the last few years, but I run my business under Bo Burlingham's notion of a small giant, which are companies that choose to be great instead of big. Choose to be great instead of big. And I really have been evolving this last 5 to 10, really since the probably pandemic and since losing my brother, that I would much rather, and I say it this way, I would rather impact a few than impress a lot. And so that's my fundamental principle about how I run my business. And again, this is aspirational, that I want to really, I don't need to grow big. And a lot of people could come in and say, well, you could market this and reach many more people. Maybe I could, but I don't want to take away my own quality of life and my own contentment and my own relationships. I don't want those to pay for me wanting to make this thing bigger. So I'm relaxing more with it, just letting it unfold. So then what I would say, and I do have to plant a seed for accountability here, is how do you take your quality of life and turn it into action? And that's through accountability. Turn your defined quality of life into required weekly actions. So sit down and think, what actions do I need to take in the next week to take me toward my quality of life, so that my quality of life becomes a tool to create my the other way around. My standard of living is a tool to create the kind of quality of life that matters to me. And I learned this from Steve Covey, years ago, when he talked. The one habit that has stayed with me is the power of weekly planning. Don't plan your day. Just don't plan your day, because you're just managing the tyranny of the urgent. Plan your week and plan those big rocks first. And so your big rocks are what makes your quality of life better, and schedule those into for habits. Make an agreement with yourself to follow through. Start small. Much better, as we know in relationships, it's better to under promise and over deliver. If you want to get your health in order, start walking 5 minutes a day. And I'd far rather see somebody walk for 5 minutes a day consistently than for an hour once a month and then let it drop off. So I'd much rather have a small success than a big failure. Find an accountability partner who will support you and help hold you accountable, to say, I really want to build a better quality of life, and I need some help with that. Find a mentor who has what you want, that can inspire you on that path. And then track your increased level of self-respect as you honor promises that you make to yourself. We all respect people who keep their promises. We're going to talk about trust next month in my webinar, and accountability will be a big component to that. When people keep their promises to you, it increases our respect for them. Well, it's no different than when you keep promises to yourself. You increase your respect. We find this in the addiction field, that what addicts are doing is they're recovering their integrity. And by learning how to keep a promise and holding themselves accountable, that's what gives them a sense of self-respect. So let me complete my presentation here with my last point, which is lean into the hard stuff. Folks, I'm not sure that we are really building a culture of toughness and grit, and people who can walk through the grind and really are tough enough. And we see this in some of our mental health challenges. And you'll see this quote a lot. This is kind of a foundational quote for me. It's been said that a bird sitting on a branch is never afraid of the branch breaking. It's because her trust is in the branch and not in her wings. We've spent a generation, folks, strengthening the wings of our young people. and making the branch easy. And what happens is, if you don't have good, strong wings, you're going to get anxious. And we send them off to college, or we keep them living at home. And we don't understand that the question is, whether they're off to college, whether they're living at home, the question is, are we strengthening their wings? And are you strengthening your own wings in terms of difficulty? The science fiction writer Michael Hopp said it this way: hard times create strong people. Strong people create good times. Good times create weak people, and weak people create hard times. My mother taught me about hard times. This is her house, a 900 square foot house. 10 kids were raised in this house. She lost two siblings to 4 pandemics. I think she'd probably say today we're a little spoiled. And my mother would say she had 3 statements that have stayed with me, and whether they were implied or whether they were explicit, these are 3 statements of the wisdom of my mother. Always make your gratitude bigger than your circumstances. Don't ask what the world can give you. Ask what you can give to the world. We lived in the JFK age. Don't ask what your country can give to you. What can you give to your country? It's not my job to make you happy. It's my job to make you a good citizen. Now, when I ask parents, and I get this, we want our kids to be happy. What we want to make sure, though, nothing wrong with that goal. What we want to make sure is it's not the parents' job to make their kids happy. It's happiness is not a destination. It's a method of travel, and happiness will precede you if you live well. My mother lived through the Second World War and through the loss of her first husband, who sadly came down in a plane in Germany. So there's some toughness. Now, we don't want to go back to those good old days. They weren't the good old days. They were just the old days, but there was some value in those old days, folks. This is the house I was raised in. And we moved out here when I was 12 years old, and for 3 winters, we did not have any central heating. That was, by the way, that was our furnace, is a coal and wood stove. And it was my job in the morning. And by the way, we didn't have running water, although my dad would say we had to run for water out in the well. And we literally had to go out, pump the well, and haul the water in with buckets. That was our water. And it was Dad's job to heat to light the furnace, to put the coal and wood in the stove in the morning. And it was my job to heat it when I came home from school at night. And I'm not going to give you a story of being uphill to school 6 miles both ways, but I will tell you, these were the toughest years of my life. My weekends were spent chopping wood and sawing wood, because you know what? You had to contribute. If you didn't get the wood in, you just weren't warm. And Dad and I had this competition where we would see who could heat this the hottest. And you can put we got shingles off of a demolished railroad station. We put shingles, some newspaper, some birch, and some coal in there, and then just stick a little gasoline. And I'll tell you, you can get that stove. We got that stove red hot, and I won the competition between Dad and I. Back in those days, it was Fahrenheit, and it was 117 degrees Fahrenheit in that living room. Unfortunately, I burned a hole, and I just about burned the house down, but Mom kind of put a stop to that. It was the hardest 3 years of my life. That, by the way, that was the year of 1967, which was, if you go back, it was one of the coldest years on record in this province. It was over 30 below for 30 consecutive days. And it was one of the hardest times in my life. And it was one of the best times in my life. It developed a notion of toughness that have stood me in stead all my life, because I have struggled with some mental health challenges. And those tough years are what gets me through these times. There was chickens. I don't know if any of you raised chickens, but there was chickens that were raised across the street from us, across the road. And my giving nature, there was some challenges in my family, and I learned to be a giver early in my years. But I learned a very hard lesson, that when you're watching chicks peck their way out of an egg, it's very painful. to watch a chick peck its way out of an egg. It takes somewhere between 12 and 24 hours by the time they start to peck. And my helping nature, I wanted to help these chicks. And what I would do is tap on the eggs and help break the eggs. And what we found, to my horror, is that the chick will die. It has to go through the struggle to gain the strength that it takes to survive. Okay? Embrace the hard stuff. I'm big on leaning in to the pain and not withdraw from it. Welcome the grind. Okay? Private victory precedes a public victory. Steve Covey would often preach this. Get up and do something hard in the morning. Get up and exercise your mind, your body, your spirit. Do something that's uncomfortable to start the day with. Get that respect for yourself. Sometimes we hide. And what do we tell kids? Don't be afraid of the dark. Don't be afraid to lean into the hard feelings, okay? As we say in the trauma work, you got to look at some point in your life, you got to look the dragon in the eye, and you got to face this stuff and heal from it. Authenticity is not about fixing what's broken. It's about engaging in a compassionate excavation to uncover your true self. And what if that pain wasn't actually bad, but it was actually necessary for you to chisel away the parts to discover your true self? So I'm gonna in the last 10 minutes here, I want to leave you with a couple of things. I want to leave you with this page, this slide, between being fragmented, which is what I'm going to call a distraction. We have all kinds of ways in our world today to distract ourselves. And the very thing that we distract ourselves from becomes our prison to block us from our true nature. And versus deepening, which is moving toward our wholeness. So let me share with you what distraction looks like. Consumption, consuming news, the stuff of, we can consume stuff in our life, consume alcohol. And again, there's nothing wrong with news. There's nothing wrong with some stuff in our life, and there's nothing wrong with alcohol. It's, are we consuming it to distract ourselves from life? We had a horrible tragedy, we all know, in this country 2 weeks ago. And the interesting thing is how easy it is to be consumed by the news is not the same as stopping and grieving, not the same as stopping and allowing that experience to touch our heart. There was a very moving experience at the vigil, at the school, where we had all three of our politicians, of our leaders of our country, that were at the school celebrating, acknowledging the pain and being with that grief. And all three politicians were given an exercise by the Indigenous elder that was there, and they were holding hands, and it brought us together, and it brought us to a place of grief. And what they were celebrating is celebrating the community and the love in that community. I still have a very difficult time talking about it, but it's different than being consumed by the drama binging, by the doom scrolling. And if you don't know what doom scrolling is, consider yourself fortunate. It's one thing to come home after a day and scroll through the social media feeds and multitasking and developing things in our life versus deepening our life, versus with generosity, with actual grieving, with being still, with being present, with connecting, with being around animals and with nature. Just notice the difference. I'm not saying it's wrong to distract. We had 2 weeks of distraction in the Olympics. There's nothing wrong with distracting ourselves, but most news feeds are not there to inform us. They're there to entertain us. And most of the time we watch the news and have the obsession goes over and over and over in our mind. And that's a different experience than actually sitting still and grieving or being still to what the news is actually bringing us. And so what I'm suggesting is this notion of really being conscious, Notice the difference between going home at night and binge watching episodes on Netflix and actually going for a walk and being connected to nature and to animals. Notice the difference between being on a device where we're completely lost in the world of technology and what this is doing to our brain, and going for a walk with the dogs in the morning. Just notice the difference. We all distract from this world of being, it's called being human. But what I'm asking is to be attentive. The one thing these dogs teach me is how stillness, they will stop and look at a view, and they will remind me to pay attention and to be present. And I noticed being around the horses when I was healing my brother's loss, healing that, going through that grieving process, and the difference between being in nature and being distracted by life. Notice when you're having lunch, how easy it is to watch technology than it actually is to sit and experience our food and experience the people that we're with. Are we actually looking at the people that we're with and looking into their eyes and experiencing their presence? I'm going to leave you with this last story because it's really the foundation of my life. My dad was in a job that was not aligned with his nature. He was an administrator because he was, at heart, he was an artist, but he never gave himself permission to be an artist until he was 65 years old. And he went to art school. And he lived in a job that he was trying to be somebody that he wasn't, because he thought in those days, well, first of all, the only way he could make enough money to pay for my education was to be an administrator. And so he thought that was more important. And I'm grateful for that. But he had to take an early retirement from depression. And he lived for 7 years depressed until he turned 65, and he discovered, I'm going to give myself permission to be an artist. And he went to art school, and this happens to be one of his projects. He lived for 3 years, and his last 3 years, he was totally at peace with himself until he died very quickly of an aneurysm. But I'll just share with you one of his early paintings, and he called this painting Emerging, where he was emerging into himself. And you can begin to see that's our work, is to bring our true self, emerge our true self into this world, because that's what the world needs, is for us to bring our true self to whatever we do. So I have 3 simple rules for restoring wholeness in your life that I'll just summarize. First of all, take responsibility for your own happiness. Realize that your spouse, your partner, your life partner, your kids, your boss, your work, your community cannot make you happy. You have to find that happiness from within yourself. Take responsibility for that. Be a giver, not a taker in your relationships, but give from overflow because you attend to your own well-being. Live below your means. There's nothing quite so stressful as financial stress. And when we stretch ourselves and push ourselves, it keeps us in that morning of our life, and it prevents connecting to what our true nature is, because stress, that kind of financial stress, will keep you from being relaxed, and one has to be relaxed to connect with their true self. Live in a house that's smaller than you can afford. Drive a vehicle that's less expensive than you can afford, and notice the connection. And I wish I would have had this message with somebody when I was in my 20s. But somehow or other, I guess I had to learn that on my own. And I don't know whether I would have been open to hearing it back in those days anyways. And finally, have friends who will tell you the truth. We need to see ourselves as we are. We need to have people in our life that'll be honest with us. So folks, on that note, if you want to pursue, we have a SAGE program. For those of you who are interested in knowing more about our ongoing peer support, if you want to have this growth, it's support, authenticity, growth, and excellence. If you want to be a part of our community, please feel free to stay around and we can answer any questions. This is my we've been doing this podcast last couple of years, but this is our newly rebranded podcast, More Human Together. And we just kind of talk about whatever's on our mind. So if you want to it's on any platform if you want to find that podcast. I want to welcome you to our next webinar, which will be Friday, March the 27th, on cultivating trust, the invisible foundation of thriving communities and organizations. We're going to dive more deeply into the whole topic of trust. Thank you very much. We're going to stop sharing here. I'm going to stop recording.